Hi, I'm David Alzamendi, independent data architect and consultant at Level Up Your Data. And today we're going to be talking about choosing the right data store within Microsoft Fabric. As you know, choosing the right data store in Microsoft Fabric sometimes it can be a little bit challenging because of all the options that we have. So let's get started and have a look at the fundamentals, the concept that is going to help you as well to pass the exam, the DP700. But also let's look at different scenarios that you might go through when choosing the right data store in Microsoft Fabric. All right. So when you look at Microsoft Fabric, a quick recap. So when you are moving the data from your source systems within Microsoft Fabric, all the data is going to be stored in the logical data store of OneLake. So that means that, as you can see in this example, when you move the data from any of your source systems, it could be this customer relationship management system, the enterprise resource planning system. And this specific example is for a school. So you might have tuition management, or maybe you have data in software as a service providers. It could be anywhere. It could be on premises. It could be databases. It could be getting the information from APIs. As you know, that they became really popular. Wherever the data is coming from. So once that you pull out that information from the source systems, you're going to put that information in the logical data store of OneLake. Now, once that information is in OneLake and it becomes available through the different Microsoft Fabric experiences, and you can see in here, you might be using the data integration experience, data factory, and data flows to bring the information in. Then you have to somehow start exposing that information for your organization so they can start creating reports, business intelligence reports, Power BI reports, or you might have some data scientists that they want to build some machine learning models. Whatever the use case is for the data, the first thing that you have to do is to give that data shape, right? So that information has to be stored in a specific format so it can be consumed by any of the experiences within Microsoft Fabric. So let's give an example. So as soon as you land information in OneLake, you might be storing that information in the database into tables, and those tables, they will have columns. The columns, they will have data types, and you store that information in that table. Then what you want to do is to expose those tables for reporting in Power BI. So that's just a quick example. But what happens is that in Microsoft Fabric, you have many options, and that in many cases, it could be confusing. So there are 4 main options that are part of the Microsoft Fabric new data stores. Those 4 options are the data warehouses, the lakehouses, the Fabric SQL databases, and the custom SQL database. So let me change the view here. And you can see we have 4 options. There are other options, okay? You could argue that you have the data markets, that information is stored in the semantic models. But when it comes to out-of-the-box capabilities within the Microsoft Fabric license, these are 4 data stores that you will have to choose between when developing a solution within Microsoft Fabric. Now, as you can see here, so we're going to be comparing different characteristics that are fundamentals for you to understand some of the differences between the data stores. But then we're going to go through some scenarios. All right. So you can see from a volume point of view that none of the data stores has a really low end in regards to capacity. So even when you look at the Fabric SQL database, you can store up to 4 terabytes of data. And in many cases, that's a lot of information. I would argue that 95% of the organizations, they won't have 1 terabyte of information within their analytics environment, put it that way. The type of data will be different across different data stores. Let's make, from the get-go, let's make a big differentiation, okay? with Fabric SQL Database, that is a data stored built on top of Azure SQL Database technology, and its main focus is OLTP transactions. So that means highly transactional workloads. So that's a big difference. And the second one, let's talk about the KQL databases. Those ones are built on top of Azure Data Explorer technology, and their main purpose is to serve real-time integration, real-time analytics. Think of IoT devices where you have thousands of sensors sending a small payload to Microsoft Fabric that they have to process in almost near real time, and they also have some sort of a semi-structured data. Let's say all those payloads, they are like a JSON format. So now you can see, we talk about Fabric SQL databases, that its main focus is a highly transactional workloads. We talked about KQL databases, that's main focus is real-time analytics. And then we end up with the data warehouse and the Lakehouse. Those are the main data stores for developing analytics environments. So when you think of creating the data warehouse, it doesn't matter what type of data warehouse it is. You know, a 2-tier data warehouse, 3-tier data warehouse, a Medallion architecture. You'll be choosing or combining the data warehouse and the Lakehouse in your architecture. So let's continue. So when think of different skills that you will have to enable within your organization from a change management point of view, or maybe your team prefers a specific developing language, you will have to look at the skill set of your organization. And here you see as well that within the data warehouse, you'll be using mainly Transact SQL. So the same Transact SQL that you know from SQL Server, when you talk about store procs and having indexes and having functions and having all the DML language and the data manipulation language as well. So all the things, updates, selects, inserts, merge statements, store procs, all the things that you already know from SQL Server, they are available in the warehouse as well as in the Fabric SQL database. There are some limitations or gaps that have to be closed in regards to the warehouse. Not all the functions that work in SQL Server, they will work in the Fabric warehouse data store. Big reminder. Then when you look at the Lakehouse, of course, here we're talking about technology built on top of Apache Spark and the notebooks experience, right? So you'll be using Python, you'll be using SQL, you will use PySpark, R, so different languages that they will allow you not only to build a data warehouse, but also to go and start enabling machine learning workloads, experimenting, enabling your data scientists to do exploration, create machine learning models. So a different kind of tool set that you have available in the Lakehouse. And finally, the KQL database, they have their own KQL language, and you can also use no code, the drag and drop experience. And recently, during the past year, they have been enabling as well SQL language to consume the information within the KQL database. So you can see already, so you'll be able to take advantage of your skills for using different data stores within Microsoft Fabric. A question that I get a lot from colleagues and customers is, how much do you have to take into account the current skill set from your team? So here's my answer, right? So making sure that you enable your employees to have the right skill set for the technology that you have to enable is critical for the organization, and also to maintain your employees happy and for a long time within your organization. But the current skill set of your team cannot drive a decision that might have an important outcome within your organization. So if you're thinking about choosing the warehouse just because your team knows Transact SQL, I would challenge you to actually explore first what's the best fit for the organization. Okay. And based on what the best fit for the organization is, then you can put a training plan, change management plan to help your team members to develop the skills that they need to use any of the data stores within Microsoft Fabric. All right, let me give you an example. So your team, or like me, I love Transact SQL. I know SQL Server from many years. I feel really comfortable with it, but I don't feel as comfortable with Python. So does that mean that my organization should choose the warehouse instead of the Lakehouse? The answer is no. Okay, you have to choose whatever the best data store is for your organization, and then you have to help me develop the skills that I need to work with that solution. Many of the skills that you have learned in SQL Server, they'll be transferable to using notebooks within the Lakehouse data store. And that's because the approach, the mindset, the design patterns, they'll be quite similar. So I've been seeing many data engineers now moving away from developing solutions just in Transact SQL or SQL Server to now work in notebooks. So because the path for transitioning those skills, I think that is really smooth. I'm not saying that they will have to, you will have to learn new things. Maybe you will have to learn you learn about new limitations. You will have new challenges. Yeah, you will go through all of that for learning a new coding language, but many of the skills, they are transferable between the different data stores. So I think that's really important. In summary, make sure you choose the right data store for your organization, and based on that, you help your team members develop the skills that they need to work with that data store. So what's next? So then, of course, we have a lot of more differences. I don't want to go a lot in detail with these ones, but let's go and review some of them. The shortcuts. Let's look at the shortcuts. They are available in the warehouse, in the Lakehouse, in the Fabric SQL database, and in the KQL database up to some degree. So what I like to look at a lot as well, if the information can be sourced from shortcuts. And you can see here, when you look at access data via shortcuts and can be sourced for shortcuts, in the 4 data stores, in the warehouse, the Lakehouse, Fabric SQL database, and the KQL database, we have yes across all the sections. And the other one that I like to highlight as well is a multi-table transaction. So if you look at the warehouse, it says yes. The Lakehouse, the multi-table transaction says no. And let's stop there for a second. What this means, essentially, multi-table transaction is when you are trying to perform multiple transactions at the same point in time in one of your tables. So imagine that you have a requirement where you have to update the same row 10 times within the time period of 2 seconds. So that will mean 5 updates to the same record within a time period of 2 seconds. I've seen the data warehouse having problems cope with this. Okay, I've seen it. I've developed solutions, and I've seen the warehouse having problems doing updates at the same time, even though here you can see in the table that we have highlighted the yes. So a way of overcoming some of the update multi-table transactions challenges, it could be just, instead of doing updates, you could be running inserts. And that's a way that they use to overcome some of the limitations within that challenge. The Lakehouse, you can see already from the get-go, doesn't support multi-table transactions. So that's something that you have to be aware if you are thinking about updating the same rows within a really short period of time within the same table. In the case of the Fabric SQL database, you don't have that problem because the Fabric SQL database has been built on top of such a mature and amazing engine of SQL Server, right? So we're talking about 40 plus years of product development now available in Microsoft Fabric within the Fabric SQL database. And the KQL database doesn't support multi-table transactions as well. So if you're looking at having a highly transactional data store, you certainly have to look at the Fabric SQL database in those cases. If you are thinking about, we're going to load information every hour or every 15 minutes or every 5 minutes and have some slowly changing dimensions type 2 or something like that, the warehouse or the lakehouse, they will work quite well with those examples. So let me go and show you quickly this decision tree, really high level, but the idea is to remove the data stores that you don't need. So if you primary business case, if it's operational or analytics workload, so if it's operational, you have to go to the Fabric SQL database. That's it, from the get-go, So you're going to use the Fabric SQL database for any highly transactional systems. So if you're thinking of building an application, Fabric SQL database. If you're thinking about creating data products that they'll be exposed through a web application or any sort of a front end, having the Fabric SQL database is a great add-on within Microsoft Fabric. And remember, it was Fabric SQL databases were the last data stores to be added with the Microsoft Fabric ecosystem. Now then, if you're looking at having something like an analytics workload, so you will have to choose between Lakehouse and warehouses. And we're going to go through some scenarios. And then anything related to real-time KQL databases. So if you use this approach without having to go any further, so if you want real-time KQL databases, you want OLTP workloads, highly transactional applications, Fabric SQL databases. If you want an analytics environment, then you will have to choose between lakehouses and warehouses. Let's go through some scenarios that are available in the Microsoft Line documentation. So the first one. So as you can see, Susan, a professional developer, she wants to build a data warehouse, and she's familiar with relational database engines, SQL syntax, and she wants to consume as well the information primarily with SQL analytic workloads. And in the third paragraph, so basically, Susan is going to choose a Fabric warehouse to accomplish this capability. Now, arguably, you could think that in many cases, in this scenario as well, you could think that you can use the Fabric SQL databases. And I don't see anything wrong with that. So many of you have your existing data warehouse environment running in a SQL Server database or in any of the other providers, any of the relational database management systems databases. Think of Oracle, Informix. So if you already have a warehouse running in any of those platforms, you could actually explore having your data warehouse migrated to a Fabric SQL database within Microsoft Fabric and not having to re-architect the warehouse, your data warehouse, into a warehouse data store in Microsoft Fabric. Now, the reason why you might want to explore re-architecting a data warehouse environment into a warehouse fabric data store is because you have run into limitations and challenges. So let's say if your current data warehouse environment has bottlenecks or it doesn't meet some of the business requirements because you are unable to load the information every 15 minutes or to process large volumes of information. So that's when you're going to explore re-architecting your data warehouse environment into a warehouse data store in Microsoft Fabric. And I know, I'm sorry about all the buzzwords. Let's isolate two things. Okay, the data warehouse as a concept where you have to integrate all the information into a single repository and build reports for the business so they can make informed decisions. So that's the concept of data warehouse. And then we have the warehouse within Microsoft Fabric, which is sometimes the naming convention within Microsoft Fabric components now is true. It is quite challenging to be able to explain this to the business when you're having these conversations. But if you are looking at migrating an existing data warehouse in a relational database management system like SQL Server, Azure SQL DB, Oracle, Informix, or some of the other providers, you could explore the path of migrating straight to a Fabric SQL database within Microsoft Fabric, because you can have up to 4 terabytes of data. Or you could explore as well re-architecting your solution to run into a warehouse environment to solve some of the limitations and challenges that you have. Let's go to the second scenario. So the second scenario, this is really easy. Rob, a data engineer, needs to store several terabytes of data in Microsoft Fabric. So we're removing already the Fabric SQL database because it has only 4 terabytes of available storage in there. So we're not using the Fabric data store. The team has a mix of PySpark and Transact SQL skills. Most of the team running Transact SQL queries are consumers and therefore don't need to write insert, update, or delete statements. The remaining developers comfortable working in notebooks, and because the data is stored in Delta, they are able to interact with a similar SQL syntax. Remember, so if you're using the Lakehouse, you can use SQL and the SQL endpoint to explore the data in your Lakehouse. So Rob decides to use the Lakehouse. It's clearly, you can see based on the first sentence, we can also, from the get-go, we can say, okay, we cannot use the Fabric SQL database. So we're going to go with something else. Based on the second sentence, so the team has a mix of PySpark and Transact SQL. So it makes you think that you're going to be choosing between the warehouse and the Lakehouse. And then the third sentence in here, when it says, therefore don't need to write insert, update, or delete statements, and the remaining developers are comfortable working in notebooks, that's the decision there. So you're going to be using the notebook. So, and let's go one scenario, two more scenarios. The third one, basically, Daisy, she wants to analyze supply chain bottlenecks for a large global retail chain. And they need to build a scalable data solution that can handle billions of rows that can be used to build a report that can drive business decisions. And the last sentence in the first paragraph is the clue for us. Okay, the data comes from plants, suppliers, shippers, and other sources in various structured, semi-structured, and non-structured formats. That's the reason why Daisy is going to choose the event house. They want to process a lot of small pieces of information in the payloads from a structured, semi-structured, non-structured information, and the event house is a great fit for it. And finally, let's go with the last scenario, is where Kirby wants to be the .NET application. So without going any further from here, and you can see that they need a high concurrency database with full ACID transaction compliance and strongly enforced foreign keys and so on. So that's the clue for us. So without going any further, we know that the Lakehouse and the Warehouse and the KQL databases are not a good fit for Kirby. So in this case, we're going to go with a Fabric SQL database data store. And now you might be thinking, why should you use the Fabric SQL database data store and not to go to the Azure SQL DB? Look, both of them are fine. It's the same technology, but it's a different offering, okay? So remember, Microsoft Fabric offering is a software as a service offering. So most of the backend architecture and hardware and software, everything is managed by Microsoft. You can still go with the Azure offering, which is a platform as a service product. You will have to manage a lot of the components in regards to the application, how to configure the network, a lot of the security behind the scenes. So two different offerings. The two of them are perfectly fine. I've seen most OLTP applications running on an Azure SQL DB offering, but running an application on a Microsoft SQL database data store is perfectly fine. And it's going to allow you as well to start exploring all the analytics components within Microsoft Fabric. As soon as you move everything within Microsoft Fabric SQL database data store, you will be able to replicate that data into one lake and start building some of those machine learning models, start to explore the data, start to create a data warehouse based on that information. So you will get a different sort of ecosystem by using Microsoft Fabric. Let me know if you have any questions down in the chat or reach out in the social networks. But we're going to look at one more thing. Okay, so we looked at the 4 data stores, and now you might be wondering, it's always like an or decision? Can I combine the two of them? And then the reality is that yes, you can combine some of the data stores within Microsoft Fabric. And you can see it in this case. So if you were going to implement a Medallion architecture within Microsoft Fabric, let me make the window bigger. Okay. If you were going to implement a Medallion architecture in Microsoft Fabric, you might decide to combine the Lakehouse and the Warehouse data stores, or you might want to stick to one of them. So let's go and have a look at the Microsoft documentation when they talk about the Medallion architecture. Really common scenario. So remember, Medallion architecture is about creating a data warehouse environment that is going to expose that information to the business so they can make business decisions. So you might want to create some machine learning models. But you can see on the left side, we have our data source systems. We want to move that within one lake. And then we have the bronze, silver, and gold layers. The bronze layer is basically the information as it was in the source system. It's like a copy of the information that you had in the source system without having to make any transformations. The silver layer is created more like a relational data stores with tables and columns and second normal form, where you try to normalize some of that data. You start creating some of the tables and columns and integrating the information from multiple systems. A good example, here you might start creating a customer table or an employee table, and the information for that table might come from different source systems, and you move that information between the bronze and the silver. And the gold layer is about starting to create those materialized views that start a schema model that's going to be exposed to reporting so the business can make informed decisions. That's at the really high level. That's the Medallion architecture. Remember, bronze, silver, gold. The bronze is the information as it was in the source system. The silver is starting to normalize some of that data, and the gold layer is about preparing that information to be consumed for reporting. In some cases, I've seen as well that you might not use the gold layer, and you might create the reports out from the silver layer if you want to minimize some of the complexity or you are working on a small team. But if you were going to build this Medallion architecture within Microsoft Fabric, you will have to choose a data store, right? So based on our foundations before, right, where we were thinking about, okay, we want to create this Medallion architecture in Microsoft Fabric. So you might be thinking, okay, what do we need to choose? So first of all, so we know that in this case, if we have more than 4 terabytes of data and non-structured information, we might put for now the Fabric SQL database aside. We're not going to use that. And in many cases, I will argue as well, we're not going to use the KQL database. So we have now to choose between the warehouse and the lakehouse. So the guidance basically is really easy. Look, you can build the Medallion architecture using just the lakehouses. And if we scroll down, based on the requirements, let me go over here. I like this documentation. We're getting there. There it is. So there are 2 different patterns that I implemented, and they are the most common patterns across Medallion architecture implementations within Microsoft Fabric. So the pattern number 1 basically is, okay, look, you could have all the Medallion layers, so the bronze, the silver, and the gold layers, all of them are lakehouses, if that's what you wanted. And you could go a different path. You could have the bronze and the silver layers in the lakehouses, and the gold zone as a data warehouse. Now, what's the difference? We're going to look at this next week, but basically it comes down as well to many of your transformation needs. How you're going to transform the data. Are you going to be using notebooks? Are you going to be using store procs for transforming the data? We're going to look at this next week, but I wanted to highlight with this specific case is that you can combine the 2 data stores. And in some organizations, they might need all the 4 data stores because they have all different business cases. Some organizations, they will have warehouses, lakehouses, KQL databases, and as well as the Fabric SQL database. Most of the customers that I worked with and across my colleagues, in different organizations and different parts of the world, when we look at implementing Microsoft Fabric, we're mainly looking at enabling the business case for a data analytics platform that you want to either create a data warehouse environment or you're migrating a legacy data warehouse environment within Microsoft Fabric. And we're going to be using lakehouses and warehouses for that. So this is a really good example, the Medallion architecture, where you might combine the 2 different data stores. But remember, so this is essentially Microsoft Fabric, right? And you're going to end up choosing between 4 different data stores: Fabric SQL database, KQL event, KQL databases, lakehouses, and warehouses. The decision is going to come down to what business case you're trying to achieve, what your requirements are, and based on that, you will choose different data stores. Remember, so the use cases that we saw before, if you are going for the DP 700 exam, you will find similar use cases to that, similar examples, and then based on this small decision tree, I think this is going to put you 1 step forward of achieving that certification. So that's all for today. Look, I wanted to keep it really simple. Choosing data stores within Microsoft Fabric, sometimes it's not easy. When you have so many options, it's never easy. So hopefully after the session today, you're able to choose better between the KQL databases, Lakehouses, warehouses, and the Fabric SQL database. So stay tuned. Next week, we're going to be talking about the choosing between data flows, pipelines, and notebooks, and so on. And it's going to be a topic closely related to the information that we saw today. Thank you for watching. See you next week. And if you have any questions, reach out in the social networks.